Every year, millions of Americans tell themselves the exact same thing. I am going to retire next year. And sometimes that's the smartest financial decision that they're ever going to make. Sometimes it's the biggest mistake they're ever going to make. And the hard part for all of us, all right, that plays through our head is knowing which one you're making before it's too late. By the end of this video, you're going to have a simple test that'll tell you which one you're actually making, and bless the exact point where the math quietly flips, unfortunately, against you. So I hear a version of this same story constantly. So let's just give you an example. Let's call the woman Linda. All right, every January, Linda told herself the exact same thing, just one more year. The next January, she said it again. In the January after that, she said it a third time. Now, here's what's interesting. Linda isn't lazy, and she isn't in denial. If anything, she's careful. She's 64. She likes her job well enough. And every time she pictures retiring, something in her chest just tightens slightly. Like that feeling you get when you forgot to pack something really important. Do you ever get that way? I do. That feeling, it isn't irrational. It isn't just information either. And Linda kept treating it as if it were. So the problem, it's not procrastination. The problem is that one more year feels responsible. Nobody ever criticizes somebody for working longer. Nobody pulls you aside and says, hey, you're being too cautious. That's exactly why it's such an easy trap. It never feels like a mistake while you're in the middle of making it. So here's the real question underneath Linda's question, and underneath yours maybe. It isn't whether another year helps. Almost any extra year helps a little. The real question is whether it still matters or not. Let's learn that answer with some real numbers. First, because this chapter genuinely gives you permission to keep working if the math says so, let's start with Social Security. You delay past your full retirement age, and your benefit will grow by roughly 8% a year, guaranteed up to age 70. For Linda, that meant her check could grow from $2,200 a month heading towards $2,400 a month just by waiting one more year. That's not a hope. That's just locked into the formula. It's already going to happen. Now, here's the piece almost nobody knows. And you know why? Because almost nobody runs the actual math. All right, now stay with me here. One more year of working, just the salary itself, okay? It barely moves your Social Security check. Let me explain how that works. Social Security calculates your benefit from your top 35 earning years. It adds them all up. It divides by 420 months. Then it applies a formula to that average. Suppose working a little longer increases your lifetime Social Security earnings. We're going to use an example of $30,000, right? You make an extra $30,000 working a little bit longer. Now you spread that across 420 months in the Social Security calculation. That raises your average monthly earnings by about $71. Now for many middle-class income workers, that turns into roughly an additional $23 more in your Social Security benefit every single month. $23 a month. It won't even buy you dinner out anymore. That's the salary impact of one more year on your Social Security check for the typical earner. Now here's the same math for one more year of not claiming. If your benefit at full retirement age is, let's go back and call it $2,200 a month. Waiting one more year adds 8%. 8% of $2,200, $176 a month, every month for the rest of your life. So the same year, two completely different decisions. a difference of $153 a month permanently. But most people confuse these two decisions into one. They stay at work. They feel like, you know what, hey, I'm building my Social Security benefit, and they're right. Just not by very much. The real Social Security lever, it isn't in the working. In this case, it was in the waiting. Now, look, there are situations where the salary math moves more than $23. If you have fewer than 35 working years, what happens? Social Security fills the missing years with a big fat zero, and one real year of earning replacing a zero, well, on the math, that's worth more. Caregivers, people who work part-time, people who, say, retired early, that math is for you. But for most people watching this, the number, it's closer to 23 than it is to 76. And knowing that number is exactly what tells you whether staying one more year for Social Security's sake is a real financial reason. Next, we have the Medicare bridge. If you're retiring before 65, one more year of employer coverage can be worth more than people realize, because private health insurance in that gap is rarely cheap. And quite frankly, it's also rarely simple. For a healthy couple, that gap can easily run $8,000 or $9,000 a year out of pocket, and that's before anything actually even goes wrong with your health. One more year on an employer plan can simply make that number disappear. Then there's the sequence of returns risk. If you retire straight into a down market and you're forced to sell investments at the worst possible moment just to cover your bills, one more year of not withdrawing can let a bad year pass you by instead of landing directly on you. So let's use Linda again. Linda's salary was $60,000, and she was putting, call it $15,000 into her retirement accounts every year. Once she retired, her plan was then to change and to start pulling $35,000 a year out of those same accounts to cover her bills. So one more year of work, it didn't just mean $15,000 saved. It meant a $35,000 withdrawal that never had to happen. Add those two together, and that 1 year swing is a $50,000 swing in her favor at exactly the moment that it mattered the most. All right, now there's also some simple stuff that still counts. Another year of saving, paying off a remaining car loan or a credit card balance before you retire, so a $500 or $600 payment isn't following you onto a fixed income in retirement. Look, put it together. And the case for working longer, it's real. I get that. Sometimes one more year buys you decades of financial security, and you should take that seriously instead of just feeling guilty about it. But hang on. Notice something. Every example I just gave you, there's a number attached to it. That number is exactly what you need to find out next, but for yourself, before you decide anything. So here's what gets harder, because the chapter you just heard has a hidden assumption inside it. And it's time that we test that assumption. Every additional year of work has two columns. We only talked about one. Money gained in one column, cool. But what about life spent in the other column? In the first few years, the money gained column is usually huge. The math I just walked through is exactly that column. And for many people, it is often worth it. But here's what nobody puts on a chart. Eventually, those gains get smaller and smaller. The Social Security bump, it kind of shrinks. The portfolio cushion stops mattering as much. The healthcare gap, it definitely can close. The life spent column, it doesn't shrink in the same way. It stays exactly as expensive a little bit increasingly so, year after year. This is the point I promised you at the very beginning of the video. The one where the math quietly flips, let's call it the break-even point. It's the moment the money gain column thins out while the life spent column never does. Past that point, the cost, it isn't hypothetical anymore. It's the trip you didn't take because you were waiting for a better time that never showed up. It's the grandchild's recital you missed because of a schedule that no longer needed to control you. It's the friend group that quietly stopped inviting you because you were always the one still working while everyone else was free. It's the health you assumed would hold steady because it always had before. And for some people, it's an identity so completely, tightly built and wrapped around work that retiring feels less like freedom and more like just disappearing. Look, that last one is real. If your sense of who you are has been built entirely around a job for 30 years, retiring into nothing, it can feel worse than staying. Look, we're going to come back to that one in just a minute because it's got its own unique answer all to itself. Look, I think about my own mom here, and I want to be careful with this because it isn't a tragedy story. It's a story on perspective. She spent years assuming there'd be time later for the things that she kept setting aside. And then my dad got Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's didn't ask her permission before it took that quote unquote later, took it away. I'm not telling you that to scare you. I'm telling you because it's the clearest example I have personally of a life spent column that kept running long after the money gain column had already basically stopped. That's what we're calling the break-even point in human terms. Look, it's not just a warning. It's just the truth about which column is actually moving for you right now. All right, so let's talk about what's on the other side of that break-even point. Because there are 4 specific regrets I hear over and over, almost word for word, from a variety of people I talk to. Regret number 1. I worked another year when the money no longer actually changed anything. Not because working was wrong, because nobody had checked whether that particular year was still moving the numbers or was it just moving the calendar. Look, that's the easiest regret to avoid. And it's the entire reason why chapter 2 of this video existed. Once you know your own numbers, this one simply can't happen to you by accident anymore. Know your numbers, do the math. Regret number 2. I assumed my health would wait for me. Most years, health does wait. It's just that you don't get to find out which year it stops waiting until you have already passed it. This regret is not about being afraid of your health. It's about refusing to let an assumption stand in for an actual proactive decision that we've all got to make. Regret number 3. I retired from work, but I didn't retire into something. The money was ready, the purpose wasn't. Nobody warned you that you can be financially ready, but still have absolutely nothing pulling you out of bed on a Tuesday morning. This is the identity regret I mentioned a minute ago. And here's the answer. The fix, it isn't to keep working until some purpose magically shows up. The fix is to build that something before the job ends, before you retire, not after. Regret number 4. And this is the quietest one. I never actually ran the numbers. I guessed. Fear made the decision, not math. And do you know what? Fear is an absolutely horrific, terrible financial planner because it only ever points in one direction. Wait, stay a little longer, Not yet. Every other regret on the list traces back to this one. Now, let's use our example of Linda again. If Linda had run her numbers in the 1st January instead of the 4th, she'd have made the exact same decision either way, just 3 years sooner, and with confidence instead of the guilt. None of these 4 regrets are really about money. They're about a decision that just gets made by default instead of deciding on purpose. So let's make this decision on purpose with 4 questions you can actually answer. All right, would another year materially increase your lifetime income, not by some less than a dinner token amount, but enough to matter over 20 or 30 years? Would it meaningfully reduce your retirement risk in an actual projection? Okay, not a guess. Would it solve a specific healthcare problem, a real gap with a real dollar number attached to it where you've done your homework? Would it significantly improve your spouse's security if something happened to you first? If you can answer yes to any one of those with a real number that you understand where it came from and how you calculated it, all that's behind it, working another year, it's doing genuine work for you. And regret one, it doesn't apply. This is exactly the kind of test you can't accurately run in your head because it needs your real accounts, your real Social Security estimate, and your real spending, not just some feeling, some vague notion. All right, now, if you answered no to all 4 of those questions, now I got one more question that's worth asking. And it's the one that it actually matters most of all. If someone could guarantee right now that your retirement would succeed exactly as it looks today, would you still choose to work another year? If the honest answer is no, then your hesitation probably isn't financial anymore. Money is a tool. Time is the asset you're actually spending. Whether you're watching it or not, look, the goal was never to retire as early as humanly possible, but it also was never to keep working as long as you could even physically stand it. The goal is so much simpler than either of those. Stop working when another year no longer improves the life that you're trying so desperately to protect. That was the answer. Don't let fear quietly steal years that your plan no longer needs. This is Brain Flash.